Live.
We're live. We're live.
Live. Okay, I only see, oh, it must be my configuration. Okay, hi everybody. First order of business is everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. On three. 1, 2, 3. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And everyone could be seated. Thank you. Excuse me for a sec. I don't see the roll call. It's usually the first item, isn't it? Yes, it's not. I don't see it here, but Mrs. Callahan, if you could do the roll call.
Yes, certainly. Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Weisberg,
Here.
Ms. Bays,
Present.
Ms. Brooks,
Here.
Ms. Epstein,
Here.
Ms. Gilliar,
Here.
Mr. Greenstein.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mrs. Callahan. Yeah, I think it might have gotten dropped from the agenda, and at least on mine, and I didn't want to do my opening before we did the roll call. Okay, well, in any event, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Tonight we have two major discussion items. The first one is the district's re-entry plan to bring all students back into the building for in-school instruction. Dr. Hines will present his recommendation that outlines the steps. We all agree that our students need to be physically in school for optimum learning and for their social and emotional health and growth, provided that we can accomplish this safely. Dr. Hines is making the recommendation how he proposes doing that tonight. Our second discussion item is a budget presentation by Mrs. Callahan. At the next meeting, which is on April 6th, the board will be adopting the 2021 to 22 budget. And about 5 weeks later, you, the community, and us will be voting on the budget on May 18th. Tonight's presentation will be an up-to-the-minute look at what our fiscal planning is for next year. We're also very happy to announce that as of tonight's meeting, we are going to be taking community comments at the beginning of the meeting, actually right after this, and again at the conclusion. This is the way we conducted the meetings pre-COVID, as those of you who have been attending meetings for years are aware. And there were community members, as we know, who have expressed the fact that they missed being able to participate right up front. I get that, we all get that, and so that's what we're doing, and welcome back. As always, please limit your questions and comments to 3 minutes. You have to be on the webinar and press the button with the little hand to raise your hand and ask your question. Our usual practice is not to respond to questions during the meeting. However, for tonight's meeting, if it's a question that we believe will be covered during the presentation, we'll probably respond, that will be covered during the presentations, the discussion items. Next week is spring break, and we've all earned it. I want to do a special thank you to every teacher, every administrator, every custodian, clerical people, our technology department, our administrators, or who did I leave out? Well, to our students and to our parents, to everybody.
Paris.
Paris, thank you. I didn't write it down. When I don't write it down, sometimes I'll remember one of the many people and the many groups that are making this work during these difficult times. So I want to thank everybody. And my point really is that we've all earned the opportunity to relax and enjoy. Whatever you and your loved ones are planning, Please do it safely. Vaccinations are underway and the light is at the end of the tunnel, but we're not there yet. Please continue to wear masks and follow the guidelines. We're all looking forward to the return to a more normal life, including a return into the buildings of our precious children. But we can only do it if everyone is as careful as possible and minimizes the risk for all of us. Anyway, thank you and thanks for tuning in. And now we're going to get on with our next item, which, as I said, is community comments. If anyone,
Yes, we have one community comment. It's Regina McLean. So Regina, if you could unmute yourself and I will allow you to talk, you can go right ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I wasn't sure if it unmuted. I'm Regina McLean. I'm the president of the Port Washington Teachers Association. I represent over 500 members, teachers, social workers, psychologists, guidance counselors, and nurses. Next year, the largest class in the history of the Port Washington schools will head to Schreiber High School. This will mean almost 100 additional students in the building. Yet there are no additional teachers in the budget for the 21-22 school year. Up until 2013, there was an optimum class size listed in the Board of Ed policy 4420R. The optimum class size was part of the educational philosophy of the Port Washington School District. Unfortunately, this policy eroded over time. The maximum class size exceeded the board's policy so often that the Board of Ed voted in 2013 to change it and increase the maximum so that it would reflect the reality and eliminate the educationally sound idea of an optimum class size. In the 1920 school year, there were 69 sections at the middle school and the high school that exceeded the board's maximum class size. This doesn't include the large class sizes in music and physical education. This school year, there were only 6 sections that are above the class size policy, and that is due to the fact that several sections of electives were eliminated and STEPS classes were cut so that there could be smaller class sizes for social distancing and density purposes. This hurts students and they must be put back next year. So what does this mean for the 21-22 school year? With close to 100 students and no new teachers hired, there will be sections that exceed the board's limit. And if the CDC guidance of 3 feet becomes the rule, it is highly likely that we will have sections that will not physically fit in the classrooms. We want our students back in school full time, but we can't go back to the days of students sitting on radiators or crammed in the rooms on top of one another. It isn't safe and it isn't educationally sound. Our students deserve better. I urge the board to include more teachers in their 21-22 budget in order to accommodate the large incoming freshman class and to also revisit the board's class size policy to include an optimum class size. Thank you.
thank you, Ms. McLean. Are there any other questions from the community?
No.
Okay, well, as I said before, there will be another opportunity at the end of the meeting.
Nora, just as a reminder, we are sticking to the 3-minute limit, right?
Oh, by the way, I did say that when I,
Okay,
Sure,
just
no.
making sure.
okay. Yes. Okay, we do have a certificate, which I am now going to read, and I know that the student, who I will reveal at the end of this little blurb, has already received the certificate, so congratulations. Certificate of Excellence. The following student receiving the certificate was selected out of the graduating senior artists across all of Nassau County as a Senior Scholar Award recipient from the Art Supervisors Association's 17th Annual Country Art Exhibition. This year's event will be held virtually in an online gallery that's called Art Spaces. The exhibit honors the most talented young visual artists in Nassau County. Wow. Select students from kindergarten through 12th grade have been chosen to participate in this prestigious event. Each district will have its own gallery showcasing the student artwork, and there will be a special gallery featuring the Senior Art Scholar Award recipients. Please join us in congratulating our senior art scholar, Amanda Strobel. And let's give her a round of applause. Congratulations, Amanda. I hope you and your family are watching, and it's a fantastic achievement, and we're very, very proud of you. Okay, now I'm gonna move to adopt tonight's agenda. Do I have a second? Okay, Emily Bays. Ms. Callahan, could you take the roll call, please?
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Weisberg,
Yes.
Ms. Vase,
Yes.
Ms. Brooks,
Yes.
Ms. Epstein,
Yes.
Ms. Gilliar,
Yes.
and Mr. Greenstein.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have the reports of the superintendent and our assistant superintendent. I don't know who wants to go first, or if Dr. Hines, do you want, I can't see you here. I have to get my gallery view.
That's okay. No, actually, if it's okay, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Shields. I'll make a little comment, and then we can go on with the meeting, because I think we'll be hearing a lot of my voice tonight. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Shields.
Thank you, Dr. Hines. The last enrollment report was completed on March 17th. And the overall enrollment in the school district is 5,220 students. That's 180 students less than we had this time last year. If you're looking for a breakdown by elementary, middle, and high school, elementary is down 125 students, middle school is unchanged, and the high school is down 55 students. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, to Dr. Shields. Kindergarten enrollment has begun,
Yes, ma'am.
and do we have a report on how that's going? Can we assess? Is it down that compared to last year? I mean, I know it's very difficult, but I'm just curious.
We can get that information for you and include it in the next board packet, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fields.
All right, so I'm going to be real quick here. It's hard to believe it's March 23rd. Just want to welcome everyone, our school community, and certainly our board trustees and our administrators. Over the past 2 days, I've had the opportunity and pleasure to visit all 7 of our schools. And I just, again, to say something that I think should be said more often, I'm very proud of our staff and our students. I watched a lot of our kids play outside today, which is always a great thing. And that leads me to believe once the weather really becomes a little bit warmer, we'll have more outdoor classrooms, I should say, next year. I'm also happy to report that with our sporting events, I was at our JV field hockey game before, and we're watching some of our sports teams play. And, I know our coaches are working really, really hard. They're doing an exceptional job. Our student athletes are doing a wonderful job as well. One of the things, not to be negative, but I want to be real about this. One of the things that I don't like seeing is when our sports teams have to quarantine. I know it's sad for our student athletes. It's certainly sad for our coaches. And it's something that we need to get a much better hold of, I think, when it comes to what happens over the weekends and then what those implications and what those ramifications are. It is incredibly important to understand that COVID is not over, even though there is light at the end of this tunnel. We have to be mindful. We have to be respectful of what's out there and understand the implications of if and when something happens, whether it's at a large gathering, a party, whatever it may be, it impacts everybody. And sometimes we don't think in the moment how it impacts us, but it does. And so I'll speak more to this later on, but I just wanted to say, on a positive note, watching our kids in the classrooms outside and watching our staff, as far as March 23rd is concerned, it's almost a full year since when this began. I couldn't be more proud of everybody here in Port Washington.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hines, for that statement. I think we all appreciate it. Now I am going to make a motion to adopt the following minutes. March 2nd, 2021, Board of Ed minutes, February 22nd, 2021, March 1st, 2021, March 15th, 2021, Board of Ed Budget and Facilities Work Session Meeting Minutes. So those were 3 sessions of that. February 24th, 2021, BOE Curriculum Work Session Meeting Minutes. And February 10th, 2021, Policy and Personnel Work Session Minutes. Do I have a second? Okay, Ms. Brooks. Ms. Callahan, please.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Weisberg,
Yes.
Ms. Vase,
Yes.
Ms. Brooks,
Yes.
Ms. Epstein,
Yes.
Ms. Gilliar,
Yes.
Mr. Greenstein.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now we're on the first of our 2 discussion items, and that is student reentry. And I turn it over to Dr. Hines.
Okay, well, thank you, President Johnson. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see this screen? President Johnson, can you see that?
Yes,
Just
yes,
wanna
we
make
can
sure.
see that, Dr.
All right, great. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so bear with me. I have about 20 something slides I'd like to share with everyone. So what I'd like to do is make a case for the full return of our Weber and Shriver students this evening. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss a few different items. One is, as many of us know, there's new CDC guidance, so I'll unpack that for a little bit. I'll discuss our thought exchange from March 5th, which seems like probably more than a month ago, but it was on March 5th, just a few weeks ago. I want to share the recommendation for Weber and Shriver students to return by the end of April. I also want to unpack and discuss the process, the rationale, and any of the costs that are associated with this recommendation. Talk about what the next steps are, and then open it up to question and answers. Okay, so we have new CDC guidance. Last week's announcement, which seems like it always happens on a Friday, but the CDC, as you know, as well with the World Health Organization, they talked about 3 feet of separation between students and classrooms is now sufficient to ensure their safety, rather than the previous guidance, as we know, that we've been abiding by 6 feet, which offers greater flexibility for our school districts, most notably us, to accommodate parents who want to see their children return to school. Now, if this new guidance is adopted by New York, we would almost certainly double the number of students that could actually come into a classroom, which is great, and potentially reduce the reliance on remote learning. Now, the State Department of Health here in New York still calls for 6 feet in the absence of any physical barriers in the classroom. And as a result, as we know, because we're doing this, school districts are getting mixed messages from our county, state, and national health officials, which is driving many of us insane. And I mean that literally, because we're getting mixed messages, and it's very hard for us to plan and budget for these particular things in order for us to open safely. So as of right now, without clear action from the state, this confusion will continue, and there will be a patchwork of different distancing requirements from county to county. And I know that, whether it's Suffolk County to Nassau County to Orange County to Westchester, different things are happening in different counties. But as it states right now, in as much as it came about in July, right now, the New York State Department of Health, the guidance says, pursuant to New York State Department of Health guidance, schools must ensure that appropriate social distancing of 6 feet or barriers is maintained between individuals while in school facilities and on grounds. So what that really means is if we are within our schools and it's less than 6 feet, we need some type of barrier, most notably in the classrooms, desk shields. And I think many of us are sick of talking about desk shields. But as of right now, the reality is that's what we need in order to bring our kids back for a full return. Now, going back to the thought exchange, which I might add that the board approved for us to utilize this, and I'm very thankful because, and again, going back to March to June, one of the biggest learnings for me was getting more feedback from staff and community, and this allows us to do that. And this question was, what are the most important things our school district needs to think about as we continue to respond to COVID-19 and plan for the future? And it's important that I underscore plan for the future, not just for the rest of this year, but what does September look like? What does the fall look like? And then, of course, asking what suggestions do you have? So if we look at the breakdown of the participants, we had 826, over 850 thoughts were actually shared. And of those thoughts, we had 24,000, almost 400 ratings, meaning that the participants rated other people's thoughts that were shared over 24,000 times, which is great. Again, if we look at the data a little bit more as far as who actually participated, we had 78% of our participants as parents. We had about 20%, close to 20% as staff members. We actually had a few students, which is I'm thankful for, as far as 6, and then we had 19 who designated themselves as other. When we look at the words that surfaced the most throughout the exchanges, some of the words that really, and again, the larger the word, the more times it was mentioned. Full person was mentioned, health, academics, and then of course, mental health of our students. And I'll explain what that looks like. If we looked at themes that were generated from this particular exchange, mental health was number 1. In person was number 2. Looking at getting our middle school kids back, which is really part of number 2, was really important. Planning for the year, meaning for next year, was another theme. And then getting our kids back full time. These top themes, as I can't show you now, but I printed out everyone's thoughts, and I want to be clear about this too. I don't know who said what, because everybody is anonymous when they're sharing their thoughts. But I read through every single statement that's there, and it was very helpful for me to see what our school community is thinking and feeling. But this was number 1, our students' mental health. And I would agree with the statement wholeheartedly. Students have been through a lot this past year. Their mental health is just as, if not more important than their physical health. Now, I will say, I would also extrapolate this and say it's for our staff as well, their mental health as well. But again, you see kids' mental health and then just mental health in general. Then some of the top thoughts that rose to the top were online teaching is no substitute for in-person. And I want to add that our teachers who are teaching both, meaning that they are teaching the students who are in front of them and then teaching the students who are remote, who are home, that is no easy task, and they have done an incredible job doing so. But according to this particular thought here, the older students need live interaction with teachers. They need relationships to learn. I've been in many classrooms where I've seen teachers do both at the same time, and I'm incredibly proud as far as what they've done. But I would agree, having our kids back in school with the teachers, sharing their, just sharing classes, their classes with their peers is incredibly important. And again, getting all children back into the classroom for in-person instruction. Kids of all ages need to be in school as much as possible. Getting our middle school, getting our Weber kids back, that's important. These are the top thoughts. And if you look at the differences, you have students need to be in class with teachers, getting kids back into school. And then testing students and teachers and staff randomly. Now, this is something I'll talk about in a few minutes, because when we looked at the top three things that really surfaced over time, it had to do with three things. One, most notably, was, as I said before, the mental health of our kids, our students needing to be back in school. And the third thing had to do with assisting with the vaccinations of our staff members. Now, I'm proud to say that we've partnered with a few different agencies. I think most of us know that Walgreens is offering vaccinations, which is great. And I'd like for us to collaborate with another agency soon to help our school community, to help our staff. I'm hoping that we have a lot more of our staff vaccinated in April, as far as where we are right now. Now, approved at our March 2nd meeting, which was a few weeks ago, desk shields for Weber and Schreiber. The board approved that expenditure of $200,000, and I'm very grateful for that. The plan was for the reentry of our 8th graders and seniors at the time. It was just for our 8th graders and seniors, but that has changed. And over the past several weeks, I've given considerable thought about a full grades 6 through 12 full reentry of our students. And as I just shared with our thought exchange, it highlighted, like I said before, 3 important points. Mental health of our kids, which, you know, as parents and as staff members, we know how important that is. And one of the, I will say, quickest ways to help with that is to bring our kids back. And again, students needing to be back in schools, and then assisting with the vaccinations and more. I'd like to, at some point at our next board meeting, hopefully I'll have some good news to report regarding that. But here's the rationale for doing this. It's very important that our school community understands what my thinking is as we do this. The reality is more and more school districts are moving in this direction. Now, that's not the ultimate reason why. The ultimate reason why is because, and I'd like to think many of us would agree, that they need to be back and they deserve to be back. I've spoken to Dr. Pernick and Ms. Javelin. We've been discussing the possibility of returning our seniors and 8th graders really since the holiday break. And what I mean by that is really since January. But the landscape since January, it's unbelievable how fast it's shifted since then. I think many of us know that President Biden, Governor Cuomo have stated that they want to see children back in school. And I would agree with that. As I've said before, we have more staff members getting vaccinated each and every day, which is wonderful. As we get a test to today, the weather is getting warmer. That's a great sign. We want our kids outside. We want our classrooms outside. We love seeing that, and that's very safe when those things happen. A survey was sent to our staff just to really to get a general sense as to how many of our staff members were vaccinated. And at this point, this is about a week and change ago, we had about 26% of our staff, and this is a rough estimate, who were vaccinated. And we'll conduct another survey, as I was saying before, in April. But I really want to underscore how incredibly important it is for us to be ready for September now. It's important for our staff, it's important for our parents, and it's important for our children, knowing what to expect when September happens. We do not want to go through another summer like we did last one, right? And so my hope, and I believe it will happen for sure, is the more we get done now, the more prepared we will be come September. And again, this was something that was shared in the thought exchange. Start sharing the plans for next year. And so that is the goal as well. And as I said before, fortunately or unfortunately, the CDC makes this great recommendation, but we can't, or I wouldn't recommend that we do anything until the New York State Department of Health changes their guidance. And as of right now, they haven't. Might they do this a month from now? They may. Will it happen over the summer? I don't know. But at this moment, I know they haven't. And I know for a fact, like I said before, we want our kids back as soon as we can. So I also believe we need to be consistent K through 12. I don't think we should have separate operating principles for our elementary and our secondary schools. And the reality is we do have desk shields at the elementary level. Now, I'm not saying we all love the desk shields. I can certainly attest to the fact that our principals don't, and I'm sure our teachers and kids don't. But the reality is, like I said before too, it's an extra layer of protection for our kids and for our staff. And if we don't use our desk shields at Weber and Schreiber, I believe it conveys a mixed message. And as I said before, it adds another layer of protection. But there is a cost to all of this. If the board is agreeable from a financial standpoint to bring our kids back, there is another expenditure on top of the $200,000 that you've already allowed us to do since our last board meeting. We need to buy more desk shields for the Schreiber cafeteria and the commons area. And so we would need about 600 units in order to do that. We would also need large HEPA filters or units, and we would need one large unit for Weber and 3 units for Schreiber. We would also need smaller HEPA units. We would need 9 in previously unoccupied spaces at Weber. Now, in order to make sure our students fit within the classrooms, we've had different constructs within the classrooms with tables and benches. And if we're to do this in a way where we fit everybody in the classroom, we would have to buy, and I should say purchase desks. And so we would need to purchase 459 desks and chairs in order to make this happen. And then finally, we would rent 2 outside canopies each at Weber and at Schreiber. So Weber would have 2 outside canopy areas for classrooms or for however teachers would like to use it, both at Weber and then 2 at Schreiber. So the cost for this, we're looking at an additional $30,000 for desk shields, about $6,600 for the HEPA filter units. We're looking at, for desks and chairs, just for Weber, $61,000. The canopies that we would rent for Schreiber and Weber would total $13,600. And we would also have to restore a Weber music teacher, because once we bring our kids back, we would need to add an additional teacher to make sure all those sections were filled. That would cost approximately, from a prorated salary standpoint, of $15,000 with a total of $126,200. So what would the next steps look like if this was to come to fruition? Well, we would need to reconvene the Schreiber and Weber building level protocol and instructional committees, as they are vital as we reintroduce our students full time. And, for those of us who work within the buildings or have been on the many committees that we have, they are the resident experts within their schools. They understand the nuances, the different schedules, and they can certainly anticipate how things best work. And their role, as always, has been to collaborate and problem solve. And believe me, they've been doing a lot of problem solving this year to best operationalize this recommendation to have all of our students come back full time. Now, the Schreiber and Weber building level protocol and instructional committees have been meeting regarding the original plan to have our seniors and 8th graders return. But if as I said before, if the board approves this expenditure for tonight, then they would reconvene. And my focus and what I would like to see is to have a full reentry of our Schreiber and Weber students no later than April 26th. That would be the charge. Now, there are lots of questions that have been asked within the board, and rightfully so. I'm just going to highlight just a few, because I think these would be common questions that would be asked. So maybe I can answer some of those questions ahead of time, and then certainly answer any other questions that the board would have. At the last Board of Education meeting, you discussed all in for 8th and 12th graders, and discussed needing to meet with the committees. What is your reasoning to changing to full on all in at Weber and Schreiber, and how did you arrive? And I'd like to think, when I said before, and I do believe most of us maybe all of us would agree, our students need to be back. And of course, it needs to be done in a safe way for both our students and for staff. I strongly believe I need to be decisive and proactive more than ever. And as I said before too, I'm hyper aware of what's happening around us. I speak with my colleagues all the time. When I say my colleagues, I mean my fellow superintendents. I know what's happening in other districts. And I believe this is the right thing to do. And as I said before in my previous slide, I've been meeting with our secondary principals talking about this. And I emphasize what President Biden and what Governor Cuomo have stated. And I believe this is the right way to go. The process for me has really, I've spoken, as I said before, to my colleagues, probably more times than they wish to care for. But it's very easy to read the tea leaves. I've spoken to my cabinet, who I rely on heavily for their thoughts, their opinions. I've spoken, as I said before, to Dr. Pernick and Ms. Javelin, who have done an incredible job, as have all of our principals. And we talked about the pros and cons. But the bottom line is the buck stops with me as a superintendent. And I didn't meet with all the committees, and I'll explain this in a second. But we do need to meet with the committee. The committees do need to meet, the building level ones, I mean, and we need to work together to problem solve and make sure that our students return as safely as possible. And I'm sure some of you may be thinking, well, why wouldn't we, or can we maybe phase in our students? I know some school districts are phasing their grade levels in. Was it considered? Was it discussed? And it was discussed. I spoke about this with our principals, and at this point, we really strongly feel that it's better if the whole school came back at the same time. So, what's the anticipated time frame? I know I spoke earlier about the charge of everyone in by the 26th. I would like to see, and we want to give a 2-week window after the break, after our spring break. So I would love to see Schreiber in by April 19th. Weber is a little more complex as far as the building is concerned, as far as the scheduling is concerned. And so we're looking at, I'm looking at, I should say, April 26th. I would also, I think it's important for us to really think about using 3 remote days before our students and staff come back to make sure everything is installed. They have time to do so in the way that they're doing it the right way, which I know they would, but they're going to need time to install all these different things. That's for sure. And listen, if the building committee suggests something different, we will certainly consider that as well. I'm setting up meetings with our staff, both buildings, before our students return. I'm also looking to meet with all of our students virtually to frame out what my expectations are, so we do this in the safest way possible. And I want to underscore that. I met with the Weber staff last week, and they were remarkable. They asked some incredibly thoughtful questions as far as what this would potentially mean. I'm meeting with the Schreiber staff tomorrow to talk about this. And I want to make sure I speak with them again before everyone returns. But just as important, I want to make sure I have the opportunity, and I will, to speak with all of our students as far as what this means, because this is a big deal. And in as much as we are responsible for providing, a safe environment, they are going to be responsible to make sure that they hold up their end of the bargain as well. And I'll talk more about that later. So why was this decision made to, discontinue hybrid? Who made that decision? The decision has been made to discontinue this because, again, I speak to my cabinet, I speak with our principals, and to be honest, I believe it serves no purpose. It will be, I truly believe, impossible to track students who decide to come in one day and then may decide to stay home for several days. And as a district, and I'm proud of this, we've been incredibly liberal with our students coming in and out at the secondary level. But now that we have this option to go fully remote or to have everyone in, we collectively believe this is the best route to go. contact tracing and quarantine change in Schreiber and Weber classrooms. How will this take place? Dr. Allen and Ms. Ballerman, again, have done an incredible job this year, but they will continue to monitor any situation and speak with the Nassau County DOH about any updates as far as procedures in case we need to quarantine, and those that don't need to quarantine, because of course we want our kids to stay in school as much as possible, which is always our target. And then of course lunch. What there's a lot of different things as far as what lunch will look like, especially if they sit less than 6 feet apart, if they are together for more than 10 minutes without masks. And these are the things that we'll ask our building protocol teams to review when they get to that, because we know lunch is a huge part of any of these conversations when we develop any process for contact tracing, depending on where students go. So this will be one of the things that will take, I believe, multiple conversations. When we look at the lines of expenditures, we think about transportation and what that means. Will this be increased? Will we have to pay more for transportation? And we won't have to pay more for transportation. Originally, we talked about not exceeding the original number of 26 students. We will probably have to exceed that, but we're still within the guidelines and the guidance of the New York State Department of Education. So that is what I have to share. I will post this presentation on the website so our community can see this. And I'm sure we have many questions, so I just wanted to frame that out, and hopefully that was clear as far as what my recommendation is for our school community.
Nora, you're muted.
Okay, well, thank you again, Dr. Hines, for that very thorough presentation. And there are questions, of course, in addition to the ones that you anticipated. I see Deb's hand is up.
I think Larry was up before I was, so.
Why don't I see Larry? Oh, because I wasn't looking at Larry.
I'm just ignorable.
You are not. It's just that blue background, and your blue jacket fades into it best. Okay, Larry first, then Deb.
Okay. So, Dr. Hines, I really appreciate all the thought and time you spent on this. I know it's really important that we balance the kids' need to be in school with the balance to keep the kids safe. I mean, we all know people who have been affected by COVID, and we all know people who've died from COVID, and it is real and it's still there. And we're not at the vaccination levels that we would care to be. So so we do have to do this safely. And if we try to wait for the guidance to change, the students are going to miss too much of opportunity to be in school. So I understand that. I do want to say that the legislative task force has been very concerned with the mixed messages that we've been getting from the CDC, Nassau County, and New York State. And we've met with not only our state senator and state assemblyman and our congressman, but we met last week with members of the Department of Health to say, what is it? The state has given the counties some latitude in interpreting the rules, and they said, well, we're not interpreting, we're just going straight by the guidelines. It's also, some of this is up at SED because SED still has some control over what we're doing, and they don't issue guidance, they issue regulation. And so there are also some legal issues potentially if we choose to go our own route. So I totally understand. I know that this has been a discussion you've been having long before you even presented the 12th and 8th grade plan to us. I know that this has been in the works for a long time, as it should have been, and as the science keeps changing. I mean, we don't keep our groceries outside on the stoop for 2 days anymore. We don't spray ammonia on our tomatoes before we eat them. Things have changed as we learn, and that affects education as anywhere else. And like the 3 feet is now as good as the 6 feet. So it's so I think we waited an appropriate amount of time to do it safely. I think now's the time to do it. the sooner we can get them in, the better, as long as we get everything done. My last thing is just a question. Is there any market to sell used desks when we go back to our configuration? There might be, or can we donate them to a school that doesn't have desks or something? What are we going to do with them?
Yeah,
will that be a graduation present?
Gosh. All kidding aside, I know the seriousness of the purchasing of desk shields, knowing that they may potentially be obsolete a year from now, 6 months from now. I totally get it. I do. And maybe there is a market for used desk shields at some point. Maybe we
I
can
was
always
talking
build.
about the desks. I was
Oh,
talking
the
about the
desks
actual
themselves.
desks.
Okay,
Yeah.
the desks. Yeah. Well, desks, there's always a market for desks. I don't think they'll ever be obsolete. And maybe we can resell them at some point. But for the here and now, and I think for the somewhat foreseeable future, we will be using those desks in a few different capacities.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions. You'll cut me off when you think I've asked enough, and I'll take my turn and wait for the next round. But I had a list of questions that I sent to everybody that I expected to discuss tonight. And so Dr. Shields, thank you in advance for answering all of those for me. And I'm going to continue on with those questions. But something occurred to me as you were making your presentation. New York State still requires children to be properly social distanced when they're eating because they won't be wearing masks. So I'm wondering, why do we need desk shields in the cafeterias? How are we legally going below 6 feet in a cafeteria when the kids are not going to be wearing masks? And I'm sorry, I would have asked that question beforehand, but it literally occurred to me as you were making your presentation. Because I was thinking, since the CDC no longer requires the desk shields, can we just move the desk shields that we ordered however many weeks ago and use those instead in the cafeteria? And then I thought, wait a minute, why are we seating the kids less than 6 feet in the cafeteria? The guidance hasn't changed on that. The CDC still requires that. And I don't know that New York State will change that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, these are the things that the building level committees are going to have to really hopefully hash out. But also on top of that, there are other school districts, from what I understand, that are doing this as well. There's no really easy answer for that, to be honest with you. For us to figure out how to less than 10 minutes, for them to eat in less than 10 minutes, those are the things that we have to figure out. But lunch is not an easy thing for us right now, and that's something we have to strongly consider. I believe this is true when we look at the kids sitting in the cafeteria with the desk shields. In as much as they may be closer or less than 6 feet, we feel like at least there's some barrier there as they're eating, and they are eating with something there in front of them. That's probably the best answer I can give you right now.
Can I ask another question, or would you like me to wait my turn till?
One more, and then we'll move on, and then we'll get back to you.
Okay. I don't know that we have a breakdown of the parents who answered the thought exchange. I don't know how many parents there are in the district, but I know that my understanding is that the senior parents were asked about their feelings. Will there be a survey of other parents, really a targeted survey sent to every single parent in an email asking them how they feel, or especially the Weber and the Schreiber parents, obviously not, the elementary school parents are all in already, but asking all the parents, the fully virtual parents may not be comfortable coming back full time.
They don't have to come back. Yeah, that's the beauty of it. They don't have to come back. And so if I was to answer that question in the sense of course, I would like to know what they're thinking, but I'm telling you as a superintendent, I want the kids back. That's what I want to see. So the parents that don't want their children back, they certainly have the opportunity for them to stay fully remote, which I totally understand and would support.
Okay, I'll wait my turn for the next one. Thanks.
Okay, I actually was going to ask about, you to mention the fully remote, who are staying fully remote. So thank you for answering that. I think Rachel and then Emily and Beth.
Nora, I think the Zoom participant list is leading you astray because I am pretty sure both Emily and Beth had raised their hand ahead of me. So,
I think we're okay with it.
you sure?
Yes.
All
Go
right.
ahead, Rachel.
Go.
All right. So, I have a couple questions. First, the 26% of our staff being vaccinated, that number seems very low to me, given how long our staff has been eligible to be vaccinated. I'm not at all suggesting that we should be doing compulsory vaccinations of staff, but I'm wondering if we understand the reason for why it's so low and if there is anything that we could be doing to smooth the way for people getting vaccinated. Are there some hurdles that are getting in the way? I know everybody is entitled to time off to get vaccinated. Do we have an understanding of what's going on with that number?
So I don't know how accurate that number is. That's the number that responded. There were a number that just didn't respond that may have been vaccinated that we don't know about, but those who answered, that's the number we have.
What percent of staff responded to the question?
I believe it was 500. I think we had 500 respondents, and we had 250 or so that said that they received the vaccination.
Okay. Do you want me to keep going or you want me to wait for
You
another?
can ask 2 questions apiece and then we'll come back around.
I thank you for talking about the rationale for not allowing students to stay hybrid. I'm a little stuck on this point though, especially since it seems that not that we make our decisions based on looking to other districts, but we do sort of get a sense of the waters. And other districts are trying to get all of their students all in. I think everybody has always agreed right from the beginning that if we could do it safely, all students back in school is the ideal. That's where we want to be. But I believe that many other districts are allowing this hybrid option still. And you talked about how we've been very flexible at the secondary level until now. I'm not clear on, and maybe this isn't a question for you, maybe it's just a comment. I'm not clear on the rationale for becoming rigid about it at this point. I guess I'm arguing for maintaining the flexibility. I mean, we've talked a lot this year about how concerned we are about mental health in general, and it seems to me that one of the ways to take care of the mental health of our students and families is to continue to allow them to have flexibility so that students can continue their education in a way that makes them comfortable, right? Because families do have very particularized concerns during this period of time. So I guess that's my overall comment. You don't have to answer it. I know the committees are still discussing and mulling it over. My understanding is it's not the same as the elementary level, right? At the secondary level, as long as we have fully virtual students, we are live streaming classes. And so it doesn't seem to me that there is that much of a hurdle to allowing children to remain hybrid if that's what families are comfortable with, because the teachers are still taking attendance in 2 places.
Okay, thank you. I think you did address that, Mike, before. I don't know if you want to.
I mean, listen, it's first of all, it's hard to argue with an attorney, especially as good as Rachel. But what I will say, as the number of school districts that may have a hybrid, there's a number of school districts that don't. And the reasons that I've underscored are the same reasons why they don't. And I would agree that it is different at the elementary level as far as not having hybrid there anymore. But, and again, I want to speak for our teachers or for all of our administrators, but I think they do agree with the sentiments that I've relayed to the board, at least at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now as between Beth and Emily, who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for answering a lot of the questions that a lot of us had beforehand and incorporating that in your presentation today. The question with regards to the expenditures that you are asking the Board of Education to approve tonight, which is really our role, is to approve expenditures. The recommendation is up to you. It's up to us to decide whether or not we approve the spending. The extra desks, if you could be clear about the extra desks, are they for the cafeteria? Are they for the spaces? I think I understood that they're for spaces that haven't been used before. So in order for us to use the buildings, right? If you could just expand on that for a minute. But before you answer that, I do want to add my commentary, because I want to say that I 1,000% support your recommendation to get all our students back into the buildings. And I 1,000% support the all-in or fully virtual. And unfortunately, unlike the elementary school, where we did set up a separate virtual school, and so families who were uncomfortable, whether it be for their own medical reasons or whatever their personal reasons were, they had the option and maintained the option to keep their children at home and have them taught separately. At the secondary level, and more importantly, not even at the secondary level, because I think even at Weber, we have dedicated fully virtual students. Unfortunately, the way that the setup has been at the high school, yes, it's been very flexible, but the flexibility in based on what we've seen on a weekly basis, or even sometimes on a daily basis, of the COVID positive cases that we get in our schools, a lot of those kids are kids who actually aren't coming into school. So in my opinion, if we are going to go all in, I think we need to have a separate, strict stance at the high school, because we are being asked to spend money. And so for me, to approve this money, I want to be able to know that I'm not approving this money and then it's being used. I think it's the diligent thing for us as a board to approve the money and then make sure that we're sticking to our protocols. So, but if I know I made my little statement, but I won't have any more questions, but if you can answer the desk question.
Sure. The desks are for the classrooms. So the classrooms that have tables, the classrooms that have benches, all those different things. So we would need desks in those areas. And as we know, Weber is a very large school, at times, unfortunately, with very small classrooms, depending on what part of the building that you're in. So those tables take up a lot of space. And so, Beth, to her credit, and her administrators, they went through all the different classrooms and they determined we need this many desks and this many chairs.
Thank you. Beth.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Dr. Hines. I think your presentation was thorough and encompassed all of the things that were important for us to know. I really, at this point, because all of the questions that I had have been asked and answered, this is more of a statement. I just did want to say, first of all, that I support your plan 100%. I believe that getting our students back to school is about the most critical thing we can do right now. It's time. I think our kids have suffered tremendously. I think this is very similar to the position we were in early in the summer when we started to realize that elementary school kids being in school full time was something that we really probably needed to do, and something that we managed to accomplish. It was not without bumps and bruises, but we did accomplish it. And I believe really due to the diligence of Dr. Allen and our nurse, our head nurse, Ms. Bollerman, it has been better than any of us thought it was going to be, more successful than any of us thought it was going to be, and safer than any of us really imagined it was going to be. That said, I fully trust that this will continue. I think you've earned the trust. I think that Dr. Allen has earned our trust. I think that Dr. Hines has earned our trust. I think that the principals of the building have earned our trust. I think that Ms. Bollerman has earned our trust. And I think that it is our duty now to follow through with the recommendations that they are giving us, because that trust has been earned. It is not we are not doing this in a vacuum. I believe you have proven that you have our kids' best interest at heart, that you are following all the guidelines, and that you have figured out that you have a better handle on this than any of us do. And so that said, I just wanted to let you know that you have my full support to move forward. Certainly whatever money that you're asking us to expend, I believe we should expend, because you know better than us, you are there, and you've been doing the work. And so thank you for that. Thank you for figuring out a way to get the kids back into school, because I do believe that we have some serious mental health issues and some serious educational gaps that we need to start working on as soon as we can. And I also do believe that this helps us move forward by next year to open schools in a much smoother, much easier, much more organized fashion than we would if we just continued to wait until the summer. So thank you. I appreciate everything. All of our central administrators, you guys have been working nonstop since last March. It's been an exhausting year, I think, for all of us. I hope we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. I hope we're starting to see some time when we can have meetings focused back on things like curriculum and education and not health and safety constantly. So let's, as far as I'm concerned, I'm ready to move forward with all of this. Thank you.
If I could just respond, Nora, real quick. Thank you, Beth, for that. I appreciate it. The other thing that I thought of for the desks too is that they're going into the cafeterias and cafeteria spaces as well. The other thing is, I can't, again, not to use the word underscore more than once in one conversation, but the committees at the building levels are so vital in all of this. I mean, they are, and I know some of you sit on these committees. The work that they will do to ensure that this happens is incredibly important, and I'm very thankful for their expertise in allowing this to happen. So, you know, not that it's easy for me to say this is what I recommend, but the real work will, you know, fall down to them enacting and making this happen, of course, with the support of district office.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Dr. Hines. And now I'm going to move on to Ms. Epstein, who's had her hand up, and then to Deb.
So I just really was going to echo the sentiments that Ms. Bates and Ms. Weisberg just said. And Dr. Hines got in there with the thanks to the committees, because I have had the privilege of sitting on one of the committees and listening to them go through all of the different permutations and gyrations and look at the best plan and model for the students, and work very diligently to just deliver the best continuity in all of this. And so I appreciate the diligence of the administrative team as well as the committees that have worked on this. And I think that the recommendations brought forth in your presentation have my support. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Brooks.
Thank you. So, you know, I got stuck on the desk shields at the last meeting because I wasn't convinced that the science supported having them. And now the CDC has come out saying they no longer recommend the desk shields. Is there and now we're being asked to buy more desk shields. Is there an opportunity for us to wait and see what New York, since we're following the New York State Department of Health and not the CDC, to see what the New York State Department of Health says before we go and spend more money on more desk shields? I mean, I you know, when I voiced my concern last time, it was before the CDC guidelines had come out. I had a sense, but who knew what was going to happen? And is there any opportunity to do that before we spend more money? And the second part of that is, well, I guess that's my question about the desk shields.
So, thank you for that question. The longer we wait, the longer it takes for our kids to come back. I mean, that's the equation, you know? So if we wait a month, it delays it another month for our kids. And believe me, I am very mindful of what these costs are. I really, really am. I think of where that money can go in other areas. I totally get it. But the thing that I can't erase from my mind is our kids not being here and how much they need to be here. And so that's what's driving me right now to, think in the way where, yeah, it's going to cost another $30,000 for desk shields that New York State may again throw away in a month or two. But what if they don't? What if they don't and we have to wait another month? I don't want to get emotional about it, but it's hard for me to think that the kids won't be here at the end of April. They'll be here in May. And to me, that'll be too late. For $30,000, to me, it's just not worth it.
Okay, so I have another question, since I have two until my
Can I
next round.
chime in before you with your question? Because I want to just reiterate and remind what Larry just said earlier, that we have reached out to our legislators, and Deb, you know this because you're part of the legislative task force, and we have asked for the guidance to be changed, or actually the SED regulations to be changed. And you know that they said that at this point, they're not making any changes. So I think you're stating CDC guidelines, and we all know that. And you know that we wrote letters immediately when the CDC guidelines came out to all the legislators and said, what's going on? But at this point, the Nassau County Department of Health and the New York State Department of Health have not come in and said we are going to adopt the guidelines from the CDC. So as a school district, correct, I know, we have to follow the guidance, the regulations that we've been given by the state. So could we break yeah, I guess we could, if that's what what you're advocating for. But at this point, I believe that question has been answered. We're following what we've been told we have to do.
I was only asking if we could wait. I understand. Do we know for sure that 3 feet or more of social distancing is achievable in all of the classrooms at Weber and Schreiber?
We believe at this moment, yes. And if there are other ways, if there are opportunities or things that come up again where it's not the case, then we're gonna have to work around it. I think we will have unforeseen challenges from this moment until the kids return. And every time there is one, I believe we will meet those challenges, whether it's the one that you're asking about now, or something that we're not even thinking about when we come back after the break. But I am beyond confident that we will meet those challenges.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on this topic for now?
You can take my hand down.
When I think I might be colorblind, because when the colors are up against each other, I can't see them. Okay, Rachel.
So I feel like one of the topics that I've been obsessing about since last summer is the cafeteria. I share Deb's concern that, there are these moments of higher risk. So I look forward to hearing what the committee comes up with to try and ameliorate that risk with the higher population of students. I just have a small question. We are on your list is 2 canopies. How big are these canopies? Because these are really big schools.
So I believe, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, are they 12 by 15 or?
Larger, they're 20 by 20.
Yeah.
So how many students does that hold? I guess I'm just throwing out there,
Yeah.
At this point, in for a penny, in for a pound, we're spending millions of dollars to keep them safe. I don't know, this is not my decision. Yeah, if we actually need more of those rented in order to create more safe outdoor space for kids so that the buildings are not overcrowded, because obviously, I keep saying we all want them back in safely. The problem is the safely is where all the details reside, right? And that's where all the work is being done to make sure that that last piece of it is true.
So you bring up a really good point, and if and when the committees recommend that we may need another canopy or two, I'd come back to the board and let you know. At this moment, we're not looking for any more. But if the committees again came back and said, listen, Mike, we would appreciate the fact if we had one or two more canopies per school because of the reasons that you bring up or other reasons, then I would let the board know.
Larry?
Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick thing. In light of what Rachel said and what light of Dr. Hines said, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be prudent to add a sort of contingency to this resolution with a not to exceed, so that if you do need to order additional canopies, and you don't have to wait for us to meet before you can do it, because you would already have the authority to put another $15,000 into this if you needed to, if that's agreeable to the board, the rest of the board. I think that would speed things up if we needed to speed them up, and give you the flexibility that you may need when you meet with your team.
Thoughts on that?
I would, yeah, agreed, Larry. I think that's a good point, and B, I think critical to give a little bit of flexibility to make sure that we can do what we need to do. So I think that's an excellent idea.
So
Sorry, Mrs. Callahan, now you have to rewrite.
Well,
I guess
currently, I'm looking for that.
Well, the amount in the resolution now is the exact amount noted in the presentation, 126,200. Do you want me to make it not to exceed $150,000?
I think that makes
That would be reasonable. And a nice round number.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Because certainly we know that the summer and September COVID expenses were all done as quickly as possible, and they were done in bits and pieces. We will be coming back to the board to increase the budget for those items. So this is not the final resolution to all of the COVID expenses in any case.
But do we want to modify item 12.2.5 to reflect 150 as opposed to the 126,200?
yeah, that's what we said. I think Mary
I'm
suggested.
confirming before we actually.
I don't know if you have the numbers in front of you, but I believe that Dr. Hines said that the canopies are just rentals. This may be an amount of money that Dr. Hines could just authorize on his own, right? There's
$13,000 for the rentals.
Okay.
Is what the number is. But Nora, I think when we come to this item, we discuss it, amend it, and vote on the amendment, and then vote on the amended resolution. Right? Would that be the proper procedure?
Okay, so
Make a motion to amend it, yes. And then if everyone votes to amend it, then to vote on the amended resolution, correct, Larry? Sort of a
So
two-step process.
we'll pull that out of the consent agenda and deal with it separately.
okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, I don't want to jump around too much procedurally, so we'll wait until we get to the consent agenda and we will deal with that because we have something else to pull out as well.
Mhm.
And I'm sure we will get to that shortly. Okay, Rachel has her hand up before we leave this discussion item. Yes, Rachel.
I have one last question, and I'm sorry to bring this up again. I'm stuck on the desk shields too, and first of all, a caveat, since we've had some big speeches tonight about how much we trust everybody. I just want to say, to me, that's a given. I do think that this administration has been working very hard, and it's not a lack of trust when I ask questions. It's that I feel that I know that I have a fiduciary duty to the district, and so I ask a lot of questions. That's my way of doing it. It has nothing to do with a lack of trust. But I'm stuck on the desk shields a little bit because rules that don't make sense bother me a lot, and rules that cost us a lot of money when they make no sense bother me even more. because we've already spent $200,000 on these desk shields. At that point, I had raised some concerns about it and asked if we could ask our attorneys what the consequence would be with not complying with that SED regulation. Since the last board meeting when I raised that, now we have the CDC saying we don't even need these desk shields. And I understand we're stuck. The district's in a really bad position because we're supposed to follow SED guidance, but here we have CDC guidance that says that we don't need something that the SED still says we do need. However, my understanding is that it's guidance. I will vote to authorize this additional expenditure, but I'd like to ask that we please actually ask that question of our attorneys before we spend the additional $30,000 on the desk shields to assess whether or not we could.
Rachel's frozen for me. Is she frozen?
We have, though, Rachel.
I'm good. Whether or not we can repurpose some of the $200,000 we've already spent on desk shields, whether we can use some of those desk shields in place of the $30,000. And I know this is, look, a huge headache. I definitely don't want to delay getting the students into the buildings, because I think that that is an important goal to get them in before the end of the year, and we have to do whatever we have to do. Emily, to clarify, my understanding is we asked the attorneys if we needed to follow SED guidance. We didn't ask them what the consequence would be if we didn't.
No, Rachel, they clarified that it's not SED guidance, it's regulation. And so
it's regulation from the SED, though.
Correct. And SED, we're following SED regulations, right? That's where we get our opening.
And SED regulations are something we are required to follow. It wasn't right. It's not a governor's sort of advice. This was the regulations that we were tasked with opening the schools with.
So no offense to my fellow board members, I'd love to have an answer from an attorney, because from my attorney point of view, what I'm thinking is SED has control over schools. Schools are a function of the states, and so New York State has supremacy there, but the CDC has supremacy when it comes to health issues. And so I don't understand completely how these two coincide, and if New York actually does supersede because we're in a school setting, even though we're talking about a health setting. Literally all I'm asking is that we just ask an additional question of our attorneys so that we as a board can assess the part that is our part to assess, which is a liability issue, and whether or not it's worth it to save the money to run some kind of risk. That's all.
Can I just ask then that, can you put together the wording that you would like for the attorneys in an email? Because I believe I saw an email to the attorneys and in my mind, the non-lawyer here on the board, they answered. So can you please?
Yeah, no problem.
Put together and but that won't prevent you though from
voting on it tonight.
Correct.
No, I support the measure and I support getting everybody into the schools. It's just we're way over budget on COVID expenses already. We had to do it, but at some point there is a limit to how big the pie is, and I would like to keep whatever we can in the pie if possible. And that's the only reason that I want every I dotted, every T crossed, so that we know we really do have to spend this little additional bit and that we can't reuse what we've ordered already. Thank you for all your hard work on this.
I'd just like to say, as another attorney on the board, we did speak to our attorneys. I spoke to our attorneys. They put it in writing. I don't want to get into the legal advice in a public meeting because that is with our attorneys, and as attorneys we all know that, but I will say that our attorneys have said in no uncertain terms that as of now, if we want to reopen the schools on the 19th and on the 26th, under today's regulation, is what they call it, an SED regulation, we are required to have the shields. Now, I do want everybody on the board to be comfortable with everything we do. I do feel like we've dotted every I and crossed every T, but I do understand that you still have remaining questions, and I would be more than happy for us to forward your exact question to our attorneys so that they can answer exactly what you are asking. But I am confident, based on our conversations, that the answer is what I just said. So, but I really want everybody to be as comfortable as they can, particularly if you're voting for something. If you're going to vote no, then you're voting no. But I want everyone to be comfortable with what they are doing, and we do all agree that this is the way we're going to get our kids back as soon as possible. And I think we are all on the same page about that. Is there another question?
I just have one comment. Rachel, I totally agree with you. And I think that the desk shields in my mind are when you talk about the rationale for it, right? Not really making a lot of sense in my head. That said, it is the SED, it is the current regulation and current guidelines. So in my personal opinion, regardless of whether our attorneys say we would run liability or risk or whatever the case may be that you're asking, as long as it is the SED guidance, as a board member, I would be uncomfortable not following it. So regardless of what everybody else is saying, I believe to protect the district, we need to follow whatever that guidance is, regardless of whether or not, we want to look at a risk versus reward. I don't think we look at things like risk versus reward for something like this. So I just wanted to say, in my opinion, as long as that's the guidelines, as long as that's the regulation that SED is saying, I think we need to follow it. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Okay, I just requested a glass of water from my family. That's why I muted myself there for a second. Are there any, yes, Deb?
I was just going to say, I think we can't pick and choose on the guidance then. And I'll just remind everybody that the guidance says that students need to be socially distanced when they're eating. So that's just the fact. I'm just reading it.
Deb, we haven't been told that they're not going to be today. We've been told that the committees are going to meet, the building committees, to figure out the logistics. So we haven't been told today. So I understand your point.
But we have desk shields we have a request for more desk shields based on going less than 6 feet in the cafeterias. So that's why I raised it.
We still don't. All right, but I think the overall was that we were going to get the building committees to meet and go through what needs to be done, I think.
Well, then is that a process question? In other words, are the committees first going to decide and then they'll buy the desk shields? Because this was my question last time when I asked the process question. What due diligence will be done before we order the $200,000 worth of desk shields to bring all the seniors and the 8th graders in? So that's a proper question for me to ask now then. So I thank you for suggesting that. What is the process? I know we approve the money. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be spent. So is the goal that we're absolutely buying the desk shields and going less than 6 feet in the lunchrooms?
Let me answer this. First of all, we've done our due diligence. I want to be very clear about that because I keep hearing the word due diligence thrown around like it hasn't been done, and it has. As far as what happens within the Schreiber cafeteria, I'm going to allow, and I shouldn't say allow, suggest that the committees meet and they figure this out. There are other ways to skin this cat as far as making sure we stay within the guidance of SED. I know from a Weber standpoint, they'll be 6 feet apart, but there are other ways I think we can look at this and to make sure it happens. What I do know, whether we agree with it or not, is that there is some sense of security when those desk shields are there, whether it's for the kids, whether it's for the staff, and it is an extra layer of protection, I think, especially during lunchtime. But more to come about that as far as all of us staying within the guidance. That I agree with you, Deb. That's critically important for sure.
Okay. I would suggest that we move on. And we are going to move on to a budget discussion led by Mrs. Callahan. Take it away.
Thank you very, excuse me. Thank you very much. After that very interesting conversation, I don't know how interesting anyone will find the budget discussion. Actually, we have not had any changes in the budget number itself since the last budget and facilities meeting. I do have a very brief presentation, and we'll also talk briefly about the controller's fiscal stress report, which I did share when we had our budget and facilities meeting last week. So I will share the screen here, and let's see. Here we go. So as of March 2nd, you can see we did have a 2.53% draft budget presented.
I don't think the screen has been shared.
Oh dear, let me go back then. I did share screen. Does somebody have to? Does someone else have to share it with? Okay, here we go. Share. Is that better?
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay,
Good.
thank you. March 2nd, last evening meeting where budget was discussed, we were at a 2.53% increase. We had already eliminated the $887,000 gap that we talked about in early February. Most of that money came from savings due to retirements of teachers who are not being replaced, administrators who are retiring, who will be replaced in most likely with less experienced individuals, and also clericals. And we were able to then bring the budget down to the 2.53% that was shown on March 2nd. And then we just had about $75,000 in miscellaneous reductions between March 2nd and this evening, which reduces the budget slightly, but the tax levy limit and the tax levy for the community is not affected by that reduction in the budget. The big question that we seem to have in discussing the budget is, where are we really, but not compared to this year, because the current year, 2021, is an anomaly, just as a portion of 1920 was when we were not in school for 3 months. So I think the best way to share with the community the differences are to talk about where we were pre-COVID and where we expect to become what we think will be post-COVID. And in terms of staffing, we will have an additional teacher. At the time this presentation was done up, we were talking specifically physical education, but that may change based on Dr. Hines' presentation a little while ago relative to music. But it will be one additional teacher compared to 1920. And then one additional elementary school teacher based on requests, and one additional staff developer. These are people who are actually employed by the district now, but were never part of this year's budget. They're part of our COVID expenses. So if we're comparing the prior year to next year, These are all additions to this budget, as are the 5 cleaners that the board authorized because of the need for additional cleaning. And we did, however, discuss and determine that we would have 3 elementary attritions due to retirement. So those 3 elementary attritions are actually offsetting the 3 additions that we're talking about. So it's really budget neutral relative to teaching staff as it relates to dollars. And then there is 1 middle school classroom teacher, which we expect that will be accessed. And we have added over $1 million to this proposed budget for roof sections to be worked on. You will remember that in the 1920 budget, we had about $800,000 in roof work and another $600,000 that was being used towards the cafeteria renovation at the high school. So now we will have over $2 million just in roof work alone for 21-22. But also, as Dr. Hines has stated previously, there's a great deal of work going on now around mission, vision, and equity. And until that work is completed and there is a more clear picture, there is not going to be any proposed new programs asked for in this subsequent budget. I will go over the fiscal stress very quickly because you've heard this all before if you've been following the process. The controller does create a report based on information that they receive from the school district and from other sources as well, because there are both fiscal indicators and environmental. And the environmental information does not come from the school district. We've talked about fund balance, unassigned, restricted, and total fund balance in some of our prior discussions. The state uses those numbers and then ascribes a percentage relative to what they think is healthy. And in this lower right-hand corner, you will see classifications. If our score remains under 25, then we have no designation as far as being susceptible to fiscal stress. And we are then compared not only to other school districts our size, we're compared to all districts on Long Island, and we're compared to all districts in New York State. So you can see that in 2018, while we had no designation, we were certainly close to having a designation of being susceptible to fiscal stress. The last 2 years, those numbers have gone down. We're down at 3.3 for a total, and that is in the area of our short-term debt because we borrow on an annual basis for our bonding. In another year, the district will no longer be doing annual short-term debt, so that 3.3 will go away in that category, but it will probably then appear in the cash and investments as a percentage of current liabilities, because we will not have as much cash on hand once we go into our long-term debt. As I said earlier, all school districts that are used in this report and the Long Island schools and the medium, they call us a medium downstate school. We're being compared to in categories of 668 against 123 and against 108 for these all of these factors. So again, this is just another way of looking at the information I provided you in the first slide. Our score is only 3.3. All schools in New York State are at 5.3. So that's a very good standing at this time. Again, now this is the category of unassigned fund balance, which we were fortunate enough to have an unassigned fund balance as a percentage of gross expenditures. That is different from the overall budget, but it's saying how much money did you have left at the end of the year in your unassigned fund balance versus what you actually spent. And we never spend every penny in our budget, but our budget is very tight. And you're allowed to have 4% of the entire budget. So since we didn't spend the full amount of the budget, this is actually a slightly higher percentage. But compared to all other school districts have 8.1% in terms of unassigned fund balance. They have almost double what we have. And in the balance of Long Island, 6.7%. So while we are healthy, we are still lean. This is just another way of looking at fund balance, but this is total fund balance, which includes the restricted and the assigned and the unassigned. And all of those together, we're at 11%, where throughout New York State, they're at 31%. They have a much greater degree of fund balance overall than we do in Port Washington. These are our nearby districts. Their total fund balance as a percentage of budget. And I don't know how clearly you can see this, but Port Washington is at 8.8%, where the highest is 39.7%, and then down to 25.9%. And we've spoken over and over again what the causes of this disparity is and how it really is not correctable now that the tax levy limit has been put in place. It will be very difficult. Then we go on to environmental factors. And really, I imagine the percentage of economically disadvantaged students, it must be reported through income tax because the school district doesn't really have that kind of information. We certainly do have information regarding free and reduced lunches, but we are not at 20 or 21% for free and reduced. So I believe it has to be a combination of factors that they use. Also, our common branch classes are really elementary for those of us who speak K-6. And we're at 21 in the average class size. But of course, that did not give us any scores. So we're in very good shape in those areas, as well as the turnover rate for our teachers and our property values. They continue to go up. So therefore, that's not a strike against us. Also, the approval rating for our budget votes have been very high, and therefore we do not have a score. Keep in mind, this is one of those areas where you don't want to score high for the state. And finally, the English language learners is approximately 8%, and the state creates a designation for that. Again, if you are between 0 and 29.9 in your total score, you have no designation. But the only thing I can imagine relative to English language learners is that it creates a need for a more individualized program. And perhaps the state thinks that that in turn costs the district more money. This is a look at the environmental stressors in a chart form. You can see that 29.9 is where you become susceptible. We're in great shape in all of these areas. Even relative to economic disadvantage, all schools in New York State are at a much higher number, 43%, and Long Island overall is at 31%. Port Washington is considered a very affluent area based on information that does go to New York State relative to end of year tax returns. And the turnover rate, we have known that for years when we've had our budget presentations, and we've spoken about the few teachers who choose to retire each year. We have great retention of our teachers, which shows that the right teachers were hired in the first place. And the change in property value speaks for itself. Compared to all of Long Island, we're higher, and that's a very good thing for property values. And schools do a lot to maintain property values. Budget vote approval, same thing. We're higher than by some than the entire state and by the Long Island schools in general. And the English language learners, we already spoke about that. And then we're back to where we were talking about draft budget, which is $167,268,942, an increase of 2.48% and a levy increase of 2.067%, unless the board provides any additional direction for changes between now and April 6th. We do hope to adopt the budget the evening of April 6th. Is there any question before I stop sharing? Okay.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Very helpful. Any quick questions? Any questions? Larry.
Two things. One is on the financially distressed population of 20%, which exceeds our free and reduced lunch. I think that indicates, I wish there's a way we could get a more accurate representation or have more people actually apply for it, because that would improve our financial status because we'd get more aid. And I do think that number is an underrepresentation because there are many families who don't file New York State tax returns, either because they have no liability or because they live in the underground economy and things like that. So I do think that we're missing out on some people. I don't know how we reach them, especially now when everybody gets lunch. But I think that would be something I'd like to see, us come up with a plan to sort of increase that number to what it really is, because that would help the district as a whole. And my other question, I forget my other question. It's getting.
That was good. That was a good point, though, Larry. Thank you. We should talk about that. Rachel.
Thank you, Mary, for the very detailed presentation, and I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this budget. I personally am really excited about the prospect of maybe being able to just restore school to 2019-20 and move on. I have all my fingers crossed that we are actually able to open in the fall the way we used to be able to open, and that we can move on. With that in mind, I have a question that's both for Mary and for, sorry, Mrs. Callahan, and for Dr. Shields about the enrollment for the students. I raised this a couple meetings ago. We're down now, it sounds like 180 students, which in the recent history of Port Washington is unprecedented because we've been constantly growing and growing. A few meetings ago, I raised the issue of whether or not there was a way for us to figure out if those are people who are true departures because their life changed because of COVID, they moved. I think there are a decent number of people who did make substantial life changes during the pandemic, but there are also people who sent their children to private school because for whatever reason, right? For whatever reason, smaller setting, different COVID procedures. There are people who potentially made a temporary decision to depart from the district for a year. So the reason I'm asking the question is that although we're all celebrating a little bit of attrition because it saves us a little money in our budget, I'm worried about having a chunk of those students reappear in our schools and not being prepared with the proper staffing to address the issue. So are we doing anything to try and figure that out?
Yes, actually, I spoke with the transportation director because, as you know, April 1st is the deadline for families to submit requests for transportation to private and parochial school for next year. And there is going to be a cross-check done of those names to see if all those families do request transportation again. If they do not, then we will certainly be getting back to you, but you're just a week premature on your request because April 1st is the deadline date.
Thank
And
you.
I
I couldn't remember what the date was on that. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dr. Shields.
That's okay. And I would just add that our registration office does also monitor where our students go when they exit the district. So we are keeping track of that, and we could cross-reference that with the transportation requests to see the ones that exited this past year versus the ones that are staying exited for this coming year.
Thank you. I think that's
So it sounds like hopefully we may have a little bit of information at least before we adopt the budget on April 6th. Although we all, I'm sure, are not rooting for having to make any last minute changes to it.
Yes, that's correct. On both questions.
Any other questions for Mrs. Callahan about the budget, or shall we move on? Okay. Okay. Thank you both Dr. Hines and Mrs. Callahan for those presentations. Excellent, and we appreciate it. Committee reports, and we can keep these relatively short. First off is policy and personnel, and that's Ms. Brooks.
My screen froze, so I are you recognizing me as the first? Because I didn't.
Oh, no, we finished your report. Next.
Okay. I heard the part about let's keep it short. So we discussed the personnel update in terms of we're in the process of hiring the ENL director, the Matter Haven principal, a director of health, physical education and athletics, and the Sousa principal position will be posted later this week. And well, actually that was last week. So it's been posted. So those positions are in the works. We discussed a few policies, some routine policies that have to be evaluated every year, the investment policy, the purchasing policy. And then we put a policy on for first reading for tonight, and a couple of them are having some minor revisions, including the organizational chart, which is now up to date. We discussed sexual harassment of students, gender neutral bathrooms, all of which eventually will be put on for a first reading after we make some minor changes.
I, not to contradict you, but I have a question. I thought that the gender neutral bathroom policy is up for
Oh, adoption. Is
adoption.
it- Yeah, I misspoke. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, no, I just want to make sure I read it right.
No, you're right.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for
Oh, and the
that.
next meeting is April 21st.
Everybody's invited. Okay, budget and facilities.
I'm going to be really, really not short and really, really nice because there is really no reason for me to reiterate everything that Mary just said in her presentation. Our next meeting is to be determined, as we should be adopting our budget at our April 6th meeting, and then we will move forward as needed with budget and facilities meetings on our schedule. Thank you all.
Thank you. Curriculum.
We haven't met since the previous board meeting. We were supposed to have a joint curriculum and policy conversation tomorrow morning on the subject of homework. Because of a scheduling issue, we are moving that meeting to April 8th in the morning, I believe at 9:30. And for everybody's reference, future curriculum committee meetings for the rest of the year will be on April 28th, May 26th, and June 15th.
Thank you, Rachel. Julie, safety and substance update.
We have not yet met since our last meeting, but our first meeting is April 6th at 9 a.m.
Okay, diversity committee, our scheduled meeting for this coming Friday has been canceled, really, and our next meeting will be April 28th at 7 p.m. We actually had a very successful meeting the last time we had an evening meeting, so, and I'll remind people, but it's really, everybody is invited, and I think it'll be a really productive meeting at that time. Legislative task force. Now, we know a lot has been going on, so.
Yeah, and thank you, but I think we kind of gave an update earlier. I mean, Larry did the update. We've been really, our efforts this year have been advocacy and meeting with all our legislators, from our congressman to our, we just met on the 18th with our Nassau County legislator and representatives from the county executive's office. We're continuing to discuss with them, just really trying to get clear and concise guidance, versus what is being said by the CDC and what the state has been saying. We do not have another meeting scheduled right now, since we are doing a lot of our work via emails with our legislators. We will schedule a meeting if we need it. We are waiting for the state aid numbers to be finalized, and we may continue to meet with our legislators on that as well. So right now, no meetings, but we are updating the committee regularly.
And Emily, just to add, we also have been discussing state aid and foundation aid and service aid. We haven't let that stuff slip, but we've mentioned that in the past.
Not only that, thank you, Larry, but not only that, but when we did have our meeting with our state legislators and discussed the service aid proposal, I believe we kind of made some headway, and I believe that service aid is now being taken out. Correct, Larry? Like what?
Both the One House budgets in the Senate and the Assembly have rejected that part of the governor's proposal. So it will be part of the negotiations when the three parties get together and try to come up with something in the next week.
Right. And we're taking credit for it. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, it's all us.
Good. You should. I just want everybody to know that our legislative task force, which I do come to, but I am not on the task force, so I will say this, has been doing an outstanding job and really moving the needle. I mean, it is just incredible how much they've accomplished on both prongs, getting us more money, getting people to look at us, as well as getting more clarity on the guidelines and the inconsistency and the differences between federal and state COVID rules, regulations, advisories, et cetera. So kudos to our legislative task force and its board members. In addition, there we have some other people, and we thank you very much. And I'm sure everybody will hear more about that on April 6th, because they keep doing work and we keep getting good results, excellent results. Okay, we're going to get to the action items now. I am pulling out item 12.1.2, so that is going to be out of our consent agenda. Okay, we need to, on item about the additional expenses for reopening, this is item 12.2.5. We want to amend the resolution, and I forget actually the full procedure that we follow, but I'm going to make a motion to amend that resolution from $126,200 to $150,000 as we previously discussed. Do I have a second? Okay, Emily. Ms. Callahan, could you do the roll call, please?
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Weisberg,
Yes.
Mrs. Bays,
Yes.
Ms. Brooks,
Yes.
Ms. Epstein,
Yes.
Ms. Gilliard,
Yes.
Mr. Greenstein.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we all understand what the amended resolution will look like, and we can vote for that during the consent agenda. I would just say that when you amend it, you can take out the word "and" before additional desk shields. Little typo, but you might as well get rid of it
Sure.
while we're looking at it. Okay, and I also just want to highlight under item 12, curriculum, items 12.3.2, which is thanking the Mr. Len Rosenberg for a donation of a fine art printer. It's an Epson 3880 and accessories. Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. Very generous. And I also want to thank a very generous donation from Hearts, and that's a donation of $2,500 for the Voices of Freedom program at Schreiber and Weber. Thank you so much, Hearts. You do fantastic work, and we appreciate it. I just want to make sure there wasn't any other item to pull out. Okay, no, there isn't. I am now going. Oh. One moment. Okay, going to make a motion for our consent agenda to adopt items 12.1 to 12.5.2, but we are taking out item. So it's really 12.1.1 and then 12.1.3 through 12.5.2, including the revised resolution that we've already voted upon. So I'm making a motion for that, and I see that I have a second from Ms. Bays. Ms. Callahan, could you do the roll call?
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Weisberg,
Yes.
Ms. Bays,
Yes.
Ms. Brooks,
Yes.
Ms. Epstein,
Yes.
Ms. Gilliard,
Yes.
Mr. Greenstein.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're up to a section 13, which is board policy, and I am going to make a motion for the approval of the following policies for adoption with a recommendation of the superintendent, and that's policy 1130.1, which is board member conduct on social media, policy 1400, which is chain of command, for public complaints, and policy 2410, which is policy development, adoption, implementation, and review. Do I have a second? Okay, Ms. Weisberg. Something wrong, Deb?
Are we not adopting policy 5633, gender neutral bathrooms?
That one is on for first reading. So
Okay,
we're not adopting it, it's on for first reading.
my apologies.
No problem. Okay, so, Ms. Callahan, could you do the,
Yes.
vote?
Mrs. Johnson,
yes?
Ms. Weisberg,
Yes.
Ms. Bays,
Yes.
Ms. Brooks,
Yes.
Ms. Epstein,
Yes.
Ms. Gilliard,
Yes.
Mr. Greenstein.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, and we are also approving the following policy for first reading with the recommendation of superintendent, and that is policy 5633, which is gender neutral, single occupancy bathrooms. I don't think we have to approve that, but we just are notifying you all that that is up for first reading.
And
Okay.
available on the website, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
if anybody wants to look at it and comment.
Yes, thank you, as all the policies are, but yes, thank you, that is good. Okay, old business. New business.
Deborah.
Deborah,
So I don't know if this is old business because I know I mentioned it back in November, but I'll call it new business. As the board and Dr. Hines knows, I've been wringing my hands over the spikes in COVID cases that we're seeing in our schools, mostly after breaks and mostly after weekends. And Dr. Hines alluded to it a little bit at the beginning of the meeting, but the recent uptick in cases that we've seen, I think I'm not wrong in saying is directly the result of some weekend parties from last weekend. There was one weekend party in particular. There were about 20 Schreiber students there. More than half of those students have tested positive for COVID within the past week. My biggest concern with reopening full in is that with less than 6 feet of social distancing, there will be many more Schreiber students, what I call the innocent students, the ones who are not gathering without masks and not and unsocial distancing, as I call it. I fear they will be caught up. They're the innocents who will be caught up in the quarantines that we really haven't seen at Schreiber because we've had 6 feet of social distancing. So I've always trusted the district to do right by the kids. I will be very blunt and honest and say, I don't feel the same way about the community. Because I see these parties and I see the cases and I know that the cases are stemming from these gatherings. And so I renew my query as to whether we can use our whatever tools we have in our toolbox, one of which would be the code of conduct, to try to stem the behavior that that our students are engaging in on the weekends, and it's athletes also. Some of the fully virtual students who have tested positive are athletes who have either been exposed because they've been on the team or they've been attending parties. So I'm wondering if there is some way so that when we do go all in, that we can keep our students and our staff as safe as possible and safe in terms of transmission, but also in terms of quarantine. Because when a child is quarantined, child who's trying to do the right thing and wants to be in school, that is mentally and emotionally stressful for them. And it is educationally disruptive. So I may not be popular, in saying this, but I do wonder if there is some way to have our students take this seriously, so that we have as little educational disruption to the kids who are in school trying to do the right thing as possible.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to read? Emily?
Yeah, I just want to ask Deborah what her ask is. So procedurally under the new business, it's usually a question that we're asking either of ourselves or of the administration. And so I'm trying to ask
Yes.
Deborah to be clear, what are you asking the board to either discuss or asking of the administration, if there is an ask to do, just so that we're
Sure. I will direct the question to Dr. Hines. They asked to Dr. Hines and his administration, and legal counsel, if that's necessary. I thought one of the tools we had in our toolbox was the code of conduct. It covers off-campus behavior that is educationally disruptive to students in school. So my ask is it possible, advisable, to use the code of conduct to try to get our students to take their responsibility to stay socially distanced, to continue to wear their masks when they are at parties. I know the district cannot stop parties from happening, but when we see spikes the way we saw this past week, the way we see after the holiday breaks, it's terrifying, it's frustrating, it's upsetting. Our positivity rate in the unincorporated part of Port Washington, the 7-day average, according to Newsday, is over 14%. 7-day.
Okay.
Long Island.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off, but I think
that's my ask. I'm saying
we need to just hone in what we're asking of. So you're asking,
what do we have in our toolbox where we can impress upon our students that this is something they need to take seriously? Because we see from the spikes that the behavior outside of school is not conducive to what is happening in school.
Okay. Is there anybody who wants to address that to start?
I'll address that. So first, I share the frustration with you 100%, and I appreciate you bringing this concern up in the public arena, because it's important for our community to understand the deep impact it makes on all of our kids, or I'll say kids who are, doing the right thing by not going to these parties and, not, I hate to say it, but then forcing potential teams to shut down or classes to quarantine. I know we have exams coming up that we need to strongly consider, and what that looks like once that begins. There's a lot of things to consider here. And so what's in our bag of tricks, what's in our tool belt as far as what we can do? My suggestion at first would be to increase the messaging and the type of messaging that we do. And I may have intimated before, or maybe I actually said it, I can't remember. I want to speak to our kids, grade level wise, all of them at the secondary level. And so I include 6 through 12. And I want to speak to our coaches to reinforce the fact that they need to make sure that their student athletes aren't doing things they shouldn't do. And it's not just our student athletes, it's our kids. I don't want to say it's one group, it's many groups. But if you allow us to do that first, when I say allow me to have those conversations first, and let's see if that makes a modicum of difference. I would like to think it would make some difference, where I'm speaking to them directly and saying, listen, here's the deal. This is what's happening. If it continues, it's going to force us to do things that we don't want to do, and you're putting people at risk by doing so. I would recommend and suggest that first, and then us potentially revisit this at some further point.
Looking for any hands raised. I'll speak then. I agree with Dr. Hines. I think that the first tool, and I think one of our, all things considered, our best tool is to increase our communication and increase our messaging and to actually go to the students. I don't know how to go directly to the parents more than we have, but we can brainstorm that as well. I don't feel that imposing consequences it's definitely not the first step that I want to take. And I also think it could have a chilling effect and even be counterproductive if there are consequences, because the information that does come to us about events on weekends or people that are exposing others or increasing the numbers of quarantines. I mean, that information may not get to us if there are consequences, which I don't feel are appropriate anyway. But I am equally frustrated about what we see and about the fact of the parties. And it's not just parties, though. It's people that are not appreciating the danger that still exists, the risk that's still out there, because there is that light at the end of the tunnel. And I tried to allude to it earlier, but we still have to be vigilant, and apparently we have to be more vigilant. And I think getting that message out on a personal level, the way Dr. Hines just proposed, and I think the way other perhaps district leaders will be able to do with their student populations as well, and perhaps with the parent populations, could help. And it needs to help because we need to do better. And it's not that I don't share your frustration. I think I just don't share the immediate solution that you're suggesting.
I was asking a what and leaving it up to Dr. Hines to do how.
No, I understand that, but we've talked about this, so I do understand, and I think the how. I like the how, since we're talking about the what and the how. Thank you for that how. Is there anybody else who wants to comment at this point? Oh, Rachel.
Thanks, Nora. So I just wanted to thank Deborah for raising this. I think this issue has been sort of the elephant in the middle of our educational system for a while at this point. And I know it's frustrating for parents, it's frustrating for students who are caught up in it, it's frustrating for the administration to stand by and watch it. So I appreciate you raising it tonight as an overt conversation. I support Dr. Hines' suggestion for how to address it. It seems to me, given that some of the problem we're seeing is at the secondary level, it's an excellent educational opportunity to talk with students about what it means to have a social contract and the fact that your actions have consequences, not only for you, but for society at large, because we're living that right now. And I think I'm cautiously optimistic that perhaps with your gravitas, speaking directly to students, we can enlist them to be partners in this, because that's really what we need. We need the parents and the students to partner with the schools to keep everything as safe as possible. And I think we're seeing this on the ground. Our schools are safest when our parents are open and honest with the people who run the schools, and partner with them to make sure that they have the best information to make the best decisions to keep the most people safe. And that's how we can run smoothly, and that's how we can hopefully open to more students. So thank you for your proposal on how to address it, and I look forward to the update.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Sorry about that. Thank you. I'm fading. Thank you, Rachel. Are there any other comments about that? But I do thank Dr. Hines for his proposed solution to this, or his proposed response to this, I should say, and we shall see how it goes. And I have a lot of faith in that type of approach.
Yeah, I gotta work with the Johnerts, make sure we can arrange that and get that going. So I just wrote that down on my whiteboard. Look
Well,
forward
I
to
don't
it.
know why are the educators planning to educate? Gee, right?
It's a novel
It's
idea.
what, right, it's what where your head's at, so that's good.
Okay, I don't want to cut anybody off, but we do have our second opportunity for community comments. And if anybody has one or a question, and if you're still out there listening, I see we still have quite a few participants. Please indicate that by pressing your raise hand button, and we shall see.
I don't see anything as of yet. I'll give it a minute. I don't see anything, Nora.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for the community members who've stayed with us for this rather lengthy meeting. I think we got a lot accomplished, and I appreciate everybody's participation. Again, have a great break, and of course, be careful, be safe, and enjoy yourselves. Good night, everybody.
Good night.